Hello. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Vibe Check by SAWO Labs. Today, we are discussing product management and and authentication within product management. And for today, we have a very special guest. This person was my mentor and manager for a brief period of time at Amazon. He spent 10 years at Amazon and is currently working as a senior tech product manager. And today, he's graciously taken out the time to interact with us. So, without further ado, I want to call up Alfred and ask him to introduce himself if he can.
Thanks, Jerry, so much for the opportunity and to Savo. It's a really pleasure to speak to you and also talk about authentication and product management. I'm really excited to speak to everyone today. It's a quick introduction. My name is Alfred. As Jayesh mentioned, I'm a senior tech product manager at Amazon. I've been there for about 10 years. I've been working with developing products since the age of 18, and I love developing products. So I'm excited to share whatever insights I have in this space with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Alfred. It's weird for me to call Alfred Alfred. I think we've always, everybody who knows Alfred, I calls him Alfie. I think the only person calling him Alfred is, people who are scared of him, maybe.
My managers mostly.
True. But okay, so Alfie, I thank you for taking out the time. We know, how many products you've built. While we have during our time at Amazon, I saw you building a lot of listing products. You worked with, streamlining a lot of fee automations and things like that. So I don't imagine you working with an authentication service as such when you were building products at Amazon. So coming from like a serious, super serious, and very solid product management experience, s- do you why do you think authentication is needed, and how has that elevated the whole product management in a way?
So I actually tried to break down this whole conversation that we're going to have today into 5 different sections. And one of them, like you mentioned, is as a product manager, like how does Auth come into a picture of product management? So let's start looking at it from this perspective, right? As a product manager, I have to also think about it in a way like this. Like let's look at it from a philosophical standpoint. I have to protect my customers from themselves while also making them, my company, and the government happy at the same time. So that's the first step when I'm developing a product. So what does that mean in terms of developing a product? Why do I have Auth in the first place? um, as a product manager, at least while I'm working inside Amazon, I don't have to specifically worry about authentication because we have our own internal authentication services and they're quite robust. So what I'd
Hmm.
like to share is basically and we know how we choose them because we have a lot of discussions with our senior tech leads and every one of them, and they tell us what is the right service to use. But what I can share on this matter, going back to the philosophy, is why do we have Auth in the first place in a product? There are 4 basic reasons. One of them is because as a customer and as a product, you need to have signups and account management. Without authentication, you can't handle that. If you don't have signups, you have no metrics, you have no way to sort of, help your customers, you have no way to track your own performance. Otherwise, you'll be completely, blindsided as to what your metrics are. And if you're a customer, you also need to have account management because people want to be able to associate their addresses, uh, their preferences, and a way to manage all of that. So if you don't have authentication in the first place, you can't handle this use case. The second piece of it is privacy or security. If you don't have auth in your product, then you're exposing your users' privacy and you're making your system also vulnerable to hacks, which is a great threat again to your product. The third aspect would basically be customization of your product based on your customer. We're living in a world where customers, want so much customization. Think of it as like, every person is trying to, a product to me is like a house. Every person wants only one key. They want their house to look a certain way. They want to do everything their way, and only they should be able to access that, and no one else should be able to access that. So this is sort of how I view it. And we as a company should be able to cater to that need. And the last thing is compliance. This is something that most often, when you're in the lower levels of product development as a product specialist, something that even you wouldn't come across. But as you go higher up, you realize that compliance is a key. It becomes a key factor in product design, and that's where authentication also comes into the picture. For example, um, the government basically plays a large role in determining whether or not you should have authentication or what type of authentication is mandated in your product. Financial
Yeah.
institutions, for example, it is mandatory, at least in India, that you have two-factor authentication. And that
Absolutely.
So there are various things, like in Europe also there was, I think, I think was called a strong customer authentication order, which was a bill that was passed in Europe. And when that came in, every product had to suddenly bring in two-factor authentication for a specific type of mandate. And now as a product, you may have not wanted that, but because the compliance or the law has said you have to do it, you have to do it.
Yeah,
So that's another
exactly.
reason what. So you have to keep these factors in mind as a product manager when you're developing a product.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think it's brilliantly put that auth can be not just look at it. You not look
Not just
into
logging in, just not logging in.
exactly, exactly. Or it's much more than just logging in. That being said, right, every time we think of passwordless authentications, you would imagine that even the transactions that we have are also passwordless. However, that's not the case because of the law that you spoke of.
Yes,
Absolutely.
sometimes
So
compliance makes it hard.
yeah, it does. But they exist for a reason, at least for now. So makes sense. So coming back to the things that we can control with you from Auth point of view, right? So things that have elevated, things that Auth as a service has improved a lot are UX, because whatever happens for a transaction point of view is something that the compliance kind of dictates. But if you're a product manager or somebody who's an entrepreneur who's trying to add an Auth layer, that does that elevate your user experience in any way? And if it does, what are the some metrics that are hit by that?
Absolutely. So let's look at it this way, right? Again, let's start with the philosophy, right? Specifically, when you take Auth and UX, this is a very, very complex problem for a product manager, and a lot of product managers struggle with this. This is the philosophy behind it. He who can balance security and laziness earns the most profit. So if you can balance security and laziness, your product is going to be profitable, and this is the eternal struggle. And some areas that authentication plays, like for example, as a customer, here are some metrics that are impacted by authentication. Sign up drop rates. Like if there about, I think, there's a the minute the two-factor authentication came in place, a company, I think it was Swipe, which is a digital transactions company in the US, 25% decrease in signups because that was part of the authentication. So that was a drop. And there are many reasons for that also. Like some people, they're like, oh, I don't have my phone, or it's like, oh, my phone doesn't have fingerprint capability, or whatever the second factor is that it was on, for that Swipe right to implement. 25% of their signups just dropped. So sign-up rates are impacted by the type of authentication that you have. Another thing is your conversion rates. I think this was something I saw in another talk about. 70% of your OTPs don't really make it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's about 30% of merchants not getting their money, and that's
Yeah.
going to lead to a lot of frustration, and that's lost GMS as well. For example, at least in India, if you look at banking institutions, this was a crazy statistic that I came across. Public sector banks have a technical failure rate of over 3%, with a max being 14%. The only private banks are about less than 3%, and Paytm is the only one that has 0.02% failure rate, which is why it's so successful. So this is one way. This is one way where it impacts your conversion rates also. Next, you have security breaches. If you don't have a strong authentication layer in place, you're going to lose your customer trust. Statistics say that 70% of your customers will abandon your business, will abandon your product if it is reported with a data breach. So
Yeah.
another reason why you have to have authentication in place to prevent that. If you don't have that, you have the risk of losing 70% of your customer base. Then you also have third-party applications experiences. This is like there are some. This is mostly in enterprise organizations, or when you have third-party integrations, like from one site you go to another site, and they expect to have a consistent experience without having to re-log in over and over again. If you have, for example, SSO, which is another way of authentication, you are saving about 9 minutes per employee. So in an enterprise solution, that's a large amount of cost savings. It also reduces your number of bad passwords. There's so many benefits to it. So that is another example of how authentication impacts your seamless experience. Finally, there is also this last thing, which is again not known much, or you'd be surprised to say, how is this related to authentication? This is like your extended processes that come up because of authentication. For example, in in the US, Amazon has one-click buy, right?
Mhm.
Wherein which it's just one click and you're there. Like
Yeah.
it's so fast that you're not losing. India, you can't do that. It's still, you have to do the two-factor authentication, and as a result, customers will switch and make their preferred option to be, cash on delivery in most retail sites. So that it's still one click. There's no confirmation, and then they don't have to deal with, oh, I've already made the payment, and then the guy doesn't come. Then I have to ask for a refund, and all of that processes are eliminated. But now the business has to take on this additional cost of cash on delivery or pay on delivery, which is another complicated process. So it does
Yeah.
impact the overall customer experience. So not being able to choose the right authentication method or not having good authentication in place actually impacts your entire customer experience in a large way.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, interesting statistic, right? Like during our research, also we stumbled upon this, that imagine like 30% of OTPs never being successfully consumed. The business impact of that is incredible, and not just that, you've spent maybe millions of dollars on that 30% of failed OTPs, because that can cost anywhere between 15 paisa to a rupee, right? And all that has gone into waste, right? And they might just churn, they just might cost you in indirect ways that you would not even imagine. Um,
Absolutely. It's all your goals. As a product manager, it's like, hey, that's your money.
yeah, and I remember a lot of products, right? Like brilliant products. We used to check their Play Store reviews, and people would rate them as 1 star or 2 star and give a review saying OTP never came. Now imagine, as a product manager,
It's
you would
happened.
be so
Yep.
frustrated, right?
I personally will not sign on to a product at the very first thing, like before I can even access the first page of the UI. If I'm presented with, an OTP, I'll abandon right away.
Yeah. So you fall into the 70% of people
Yeah.
who would abandon. Yeah. Fair enough. That's something that we kind of pitch and we kind of explain to our potential product managers as well. So as a developer, right? Like you could be, so as a developer, if you were making a product, as a developer, if you're making a product, would you make the auth as the first part, like while you're building the product? Would it be the first thing or would it be the last thing?
Um, so let me give you three perspectives. The first perspective would be as a product manager. The second would be the perspective as a PMT, which is a technical product manager, and the third would be a developer. Right? The developer is going to look at what's the easiest way to do this. The product manager is going to be like, I need a login page.
Mm-hmm.
The technical product manager is going to break this down into various facets. He's going to start with a different question, something like, where and when do I need it, rather than I just need it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that philosophy, the way the product manager would, the TPM or the PMT would decide would basically, he'll be like, let me try these two methods. I've basically broken it down into two things called as, one is product classification and the other is called as zoning. So you can use these two principles to decide which part of it or which phase or where you want to put in your authentication. Generally, a product manager doesn't worry about it. It's just, I need authentication because everyone's doing it and there must be a login page. It must be there. Developers like, okay, that's the requirement. I got to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's usually in development, that's possibly the first thing that's done. From a product management perspective, it's like the last step, or like it's like a default template. There's always the login page on it. He's not really worried about how it's happening. From a PMP standpoint, let me give you product classification and zoning. So product classification, not all products, depending on your industry, need authentication. For example, if you take the data of which fields employ no passwords, to two-factor, to MFA and all of that stuff, right now finance, health, cryptocurrencies, all of these kind of industry-based apps are the ones that are going to have the highest amount of authentications or varieties of authentications and securities in them. And then if you come down the industry, something like a blog is not going to have two-factor authentication. Something like, a retail store is not going to have two-factor authentication. Something like a food
Yeah.
thing is not going to have two-factor. So it depends, because there it's not really a necessity. So depending on your product classification, you may or may not want authentication.
Makes
Then the
sense.
other sorry, what?
Sorry, makes sense. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Right. Then the other aspect is zoning. So zoning is nothing but you zone out inside your product at which levels you need, or which parts or which actions require authentication and which don't. Right? Like for example, ICICI just has way too much of OTPs in it. SPI has like you have a transaction password, you have a profile password, you have, and like even if you do the profile password, it's going to ask you for another. It's going to be like, hey, we've sent a secret authentication number to your phone. Please enter that also. So it's like 6 steps just to transfer money from my account to my own subsidiary, and that's just like too much. right? So these are examples of zoning. There could be some, like for example, if your user is just visiting your app for the first time, you don't really need it. And some sites do this. They have something called as guest checkout. Not every time do you need authentication. Only when you're making the payment, you need the authentication, which is
Yeah.
mandated by law. Otherwise, it's not needed, right? Sometimes you can log into your account, but if you're trying to do some other action, sorry, sometimes if you're trying to do another action, that's when, like if you're trying to change your password, they need an authentication. If, like this is something that gaming sites do, like they don't want you to delete your account, they'll say they'll need 3 authentications because games don't want you to go away. And I've had this problem. Like I play a lot of games and they just don't let me delete my account. It's harder to delete your account if you're a gamer, and this is where authentication comes into picture. So that's called zoning. You zone out which parts of your product you want to have authentication and which parts you don't.
Yeah.
I think we have a
Makes sense.
question.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think we have a question here. We can take that now, and I think maybe that will probably give us segue to our next conversation. So, Chirag asks, as a technical product manager, what do you think of use of no-code tools for building products? And if you
What's
can
a
maybe tie that.
no code tool? Sorry, I don't know this jargon.
So, no-code tools are basically, uh, Alfie, I feel like this. So, I think you would know this. It's no-code
Probably I don't
tools
know
are
the word. Possibly I don't know this word.
Yeah, so no-code tools are basically like Figma, which do not require extensive level of coding. It's just drag and drop of modules,
Okay,
and then
okay,
you can.
okay, okay. Wait, bootstrapable ones. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
basically no-code or low-code. You can build an entire app flow or anything like that without actually needing to code that much.
I think this questions come in the right time because I think the next aspect is what I was going to cover. Because sometimes you can use your no code tool for building a product, and sometimes you may not be able to. And I think that's what's covered in the next half, which is again, if I have to, how and when to, right? So I can
Yeah.
explain that. So great segue. Thanks, Chirag, for this question. So if I actually have to decide on using something, let's look at authentication services for this part and look at if I want to use a no-code tool for building my authentication service. What are the things that I would keep in mind as at that point of time? One would be the amount of CX use cases that I can handle. Can this handle all the CX use cases that my product has to have? The other would basically be what is the cost? Is it better? Is it cheaper? When I say cost, it's not just the price; it's also the the technical, like how long, what's the effort involved. If it's like 1 hours of work, yeah, it's for my MVP. Yes, it definitely makes sense. If it's if there's too much of technical work involved, then I may not be interested in using it. The other would basically be scale. Is this particular no-code tool going to be able to handle my scale? Like for example, TPS, like what's the volume that it can handle? Does this no-code tool also have inbuilt threat detection? Like, can this service handle spam? Can it handle, a DDoS attack? Are these some, because these are things that I'm using this in the back end, but my product is the one that's going to be attacked. So I need to be able to understand all of these things. Other would basically be something like in scale itself, concurrency capability. So this is basically how many parallel users can come in and is the service going to be able to handle that? The last would basically be atomicity in the scale section. So atomicity is nothing but if an action has to be completed, it's an all or nothing. Either the entire action is completed or it fails right from the beginning. It's not a half case. To give
Mm-hmm.
you an example of an atomicity, it's like imagine you have a banking transaction. Debit and credit has to happen at the same time, right? Or if it's a sync action across all of the devices, it has to happen at the same time. 5 devices, it should not get synced, and it should, one device, it's not. So that's scale basically. For example, if let's look at Auth. Like I'm trying to log in onto my laptop, but this fingerprint scanner is on my phone. I do the scan over here. It says yes over here, but it's not reflecting over here,
Yeah, makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
So that's in scale. Apart from that, we have this other thing which is going, and I'm going really technical inside because that's what I'm saying. This is what a PMT looks at, especially when you're bringing in outside tools into our platform or into our product. This is called a SCAP. It's a very famous test that any developer would do. This happens on your backend system that's powering the Auth service. You have to ensure that it has consistency. It's always going to be available, and it's not going to have any partition problems. So these are the four major things that I would look at to decide if I'm going to use something outside and if it suits my use cases also. In terms of customer UX use cases, there are a couple of ways to break that down. Like number one, does it have encryption? Because encryption is important. So the service must be following some form of encryption. If it's not following encryption, I may not be inclined to use it. How many types of authentication methods does it support? Does it support only SMS, email? Does it support MFA if I want to extend it? So does the same company that's providing the service also have, multi-factor authentication? Does it also have custom capabilities? Like for some customers, they're like, I don't want any OTPs. Can it support that use case? Again, depends on our business and my product needs. Then security capabilities, making sure that they have security in place. They have their own you have good protocols between your services and your application. That is also a must. And finally would basically be RBA, which is nothing but, this is a future. Again, I'm giving you like a very holistic view of how I would assess an
Yeah.
external application before we bring it in, because these are the arguments we have with the devs all the time. When they're like, hey, I just want to bring this one thing inside, it's a third-party application, can we use it? And we go through this long discussion. So RBA is
Yeah.
nothing but risk-based assessment models. So it's like the service is like, hey, I'll determine whether or not this customer needs authentication or not. So they have their own methodology. So if they have this capability, I'll be like, it's a plus, it's in the future, because I don't have to build it on my side. So keeping all of these factors in mind, I would make a decision of whether or not I should use this for my product, or should I just invest in building my whole product, my own service, and then maybe selling that to the market. So
Makes sense. Yeah.
finding that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes me back to what you said, right? Like, what Amazon is doing. Obviously, they have like a really huge set of guiding principles before they integrate a third-party app. A lot of young startups also, I think they also are kind of finding a way to build something which is as easy or as revolutionary as Amazon's one-click buyout, right? And so the thing that the problem that we're solving is actually a passwordless authentication. So what that does is actually registers you and your device for the first time, and after that time, any subsequent logins, all you have to do is just one click and you're in. So think of it like if you could be in any app whatsoever. Let's say I build a small marketplace. I log in, I'm into the app, I select it, I go at the checkout, I log in again if there is an auth checkpoint there at all, depending upon how the technical product manager has structured it, and then you're out. But basically, it has to be as easy as you say. What do you think from a passwordless point of view? Do you think it's just a little bit of fatigue now that everything's kind of virtual and online? There are too many tools, too many passwords, and just like too much cumbersome all around.
I mean, on average, a person has about 25 passwords, and
My God.
70% of those passwords are almost variations of the same. And
Yeah,
you reset almost 50% of your passwords. So this is the current state of our passwords. It's very fascinating. I was going through these statistics just before this call on how people are willing to share more. 46% of people are willing to share more information so that they are asked lesser authentication. So that's the
absolutely.
future that we're moving towards anyway. So people are like, yeah, I'm willing to share more information if you don't, keep asking me for authentication. And this OTP obviously is not going to scale clearly. So we have to be innovative and come up with new ways. Passwordless is definitely the future way. But again, it comes down to he who can balance laziness and security. So
Fair enough. Yeah. Actually, that's well rounded. Yeah. So, in case there's, if you have if there are any young developers or entrepreneurs listening to us, and today they're kind of trying to think of building their first app or first product, which will probably go live. What are your suggestions on them from a product management point of view and from an auth point of view at all?
right, I'd go back to the first question, the third question, which is if I were to, when and how to start with classifying your product. really understand your product and classify your product, because that's going to tell you what the next step is. Once you've classified your product, you're going to be able to do your zoning activity. When
Yeah.
you do your zoning activity, and I think this is the key part, like most developers may just put the authentication all around, and if there's no person who's thinking about it from the customer perspective, you're going to end up with a very, very, friction filled experience. So I would again go back to classify your product, which industry, go and look at what people in that industry are doing, see what the customers are reacting to that experience. Once you've done that experience, see if, because those stats are going to mirror your product as
Yeah.
well. Are you going to be happy with those stats? No. Innovate. How are you going to solve for that particular problem? Like for example, Google for example, it has its own, it doesn't send you an SMS, it sends you the number directly on your phone. It's
Yeah.
instant. There's a very less chance of failure. It's almost 100% if you use that, and it's not a separate app, just app directly happens. So they are also figuring out new ways to do it. Then I would come into zoning, like, do all pages need it? What is your key metric? If signups are your key metric, we know that having this authentication in place is going to probably drop or stop your signups. You may want to consider letting the person have a login experience and explore the app without any authentication. And if they show interest at that point of time, have a very fast, frictionless, sign up without the authentication, and see at which point you really need the authentication. Like all signups may not need authentication, depends on the intent of your product. Only then do you need authentication. This might again come with its pitfalls, because then you are opening yourself to being spammed and DDoSed. So these are some things that you have to make sure that if you're using a third-party tool, they are able to handle this, and they have their own mechanisms to identify whether the incoming traffic to your product or your website or your service is spam, or it's a genuine user, or you have to build that layer on your side, in your application.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think that's something that we do as well. Anytime that I was building anything, what I would do is I would first spend a lot of time in identifying uh, how has it already been solved and
Mhm.
what are the pitfalls for it. And I would try not make that mistake. And if I were to make that mistake, I better have a really good reason to improve upon that. Okay.
Balance.
Um, yeah, balance basically. Right. We have one more question here, and if we can pull that out.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So Rishabh says, from a point of view of tech product manager, what points do you have to keep in mind from UX when integrating auth servicing product? So specifically from US point of view.
From a UX point of view, I would basically focus on what the failure rate is,
Mm-hmm.
because that's very important to me from a UX point of view. I would want to make sure that this service does not have a high failure rate. And if it does
Yeah.
have a high failure rate, I would want to put that, I would figure out a way to use that inside, or, handle that within my UX. Like I may not use the same auth service for the entire UX experience. I might just use different auth services to handle different parts of my UX. If I were to think about it really from a technical product manager perspective, like I may not use the same service always. I might
Yeah.
use different methods in different places of my product. So again, it goes back to that zoning piece, because that's when I'm going to take
Yeah.
like, okay, this experience, I could probably use this because it's more cost effective. It's lesser dev
Yeah.
effort for me, but it's going to maintain a good experience for my customer.
Fair enough. Yeah. It reminds me. I think that remember the times when I think you also kind of played around with this theory of captchas, especially
Yes.
when Louis Vuitton, he came up with the captcha theory. He wanted to figure out what's the what's something that computers are really bad at and humans are really good at. It was just like visual cognizance, right? And that's why he came up with um, stick like finding out pictures and text and elongating that so that humans can find that. This kind of ties back to the next question that we have. I just read it in comments. If we can put that up. Tarun asks,
Neural
what role do
networks.
you think neural networks play? Yeah.
Good question. I think that's possibly the last part which I want to discover, which is the future of authentication. Again, this is just my opinion. Neural networks is definitely not just neural networks. Even once we're moving into IoT as well, so the future is very, very interesting. Authentication. The reason why I like authentication, it's a problem that I had tried to solve. One fine day, I had a lot of discussions with one of my favorite STEs, and so I'll give you an example of how the both of us looked at that problem when it came to authentication. And this happened when I invested in cryptocurrency. I was like, yeah, authentication is going, and identity is going to be the biggest problem in the next 50 years. Like, we have to start solving for this right now. And so his point of view was, it's not about the password, it's about how you get the password. And my point of and my question to him was, I think it's about solving, how do you know it's you when you see yourself in the mirror? Or how do you know you are talking to a person and that's the person? It basically, so this shows you the difference in how a product manager and a dev thinks. For me, it went into imposter syndrome, and I'm like, how can I solve imposter syndrome? Because some way we as human beings are solving this every day. Like,
Yeah.
how do I know I'm talking to Cherish? And so I
Yeah.
looked at that as the problem statement, and he's looking at the actual technical way. It's like, it's not about that, it's about how do you get the information. So that's how we looked at it. So we envisioned the future of authentication. Obviously, it is to be passwordless logins, and we came up with this term called as RUGHS, or rugs. Rugs. It basically means runtime user generated handshakes. Okay,
Mm.
it's runtime user generated handshakes. So this would basically, so the experience would be something like this. Like, you just go into an app. It's not going to ask you for you just give it your username, and it'll just say, please enter your user code. And this user code is a random number that you are going to enter, an absolutely random number. And it will say, okay, cool, this is Cherish. If someone enters the same number, it's going to be like, no, it's not Cherish. So the system is going to be able to see or somehow figure this out, where it's a random number that's generated by the user, and the system is able to see, yeah, only Cherish could have generated this number, and ergo I'm going to let him be authenticated. So how can this work? There are many ways it can work, like
Yeah.
Tarun mentioned, neural networks with IoT in place. We're collecting so much of information. It would be a combination of possibly a lot of factors that are going to work seamlessly in the back, and they will move from this current philosophy, which is right now. So it started off with risk, and it's going to move into something called as trust. So the future is going to be trust-based authentication, which I'm basically going to say is the future to these runtime user-generated handshakes. A little far-fetched, but
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so typical Alfie, right? Like asking questions which cross the realm of any technical conversations. Just more self-aware. How do I know what I see in the mirror is me? Things like that. Just taking it from another tangent. Fair enough. And I think and you're the dev who was listening to, if you're a developer who had this conversation and are currently listening, please note that you are Alfred's favorite developer, as he had mentioned that already. So you can be proud of that, maybe. But this is great, Alfred. I think this is some legend level of insights that we had. We like the
oh, it was
comment
fun.
section is
Trust me, it
filled
was
with,
fun.
yeah.
It was
I think
really fun. It was really fun.
the comment section is just filled with like your great. Yeah, everybody's like really big gushing over your insights that you've shared. Thanks again for joining in. I think your time's so precious, guys. I want to let you guys know that Alfred and I have tried to find a time to video call for a while, but I couldn't find that time because he's so busy. So I had to call him for an official session to get 30 minutes of FaceTime with him, which which doesn't happen anyway. But Alfred, I want to thank you really and earnestly for taking out the time and discussing this with us. This is super cool. I can't be more grateful. Thanks so much.
No, thank you, Cherish. It was a pleasure. It was really, really fun. It was a good thing for me also to brush up and sort of structureize all of my thoughts. And I really thank you and SAWO for giving me this opportunity to share my insights. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully I can do something more with you guys in the future as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to that. Guys, so if in case you have any questions for us, you can probably put that in the comment section right now. In case you happen to find the stream after it has ended, we have a Discord channel, and you can find the link in the comment section as well as in the ticker. You can join that. We'll make sure we relay your questions to Alfred, and he can maybe share his views on there. Furthermore, we use our Discord channel to share opportunities of internships, job opportunities. We do resume reviews every Monday night. So everything for every kind of developer, really. And if you think this kind of interests you, feel free to join us. And we'll see you again for another session of Vibe Check with SAWO Labs next Friday at 7 p.m. With another incredible speaker. You can fill the feedback form. You will have that link in the comment section as well. Thanks again for taking out the time. You can use. You'll probably have this stream with you forever. Feel free to refer to this and Alfred's insight as much as you want to. Thanks for taking out the time. Thanks, Alfred, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day. Good night. Bye.
Bye.